promised you that I'd bring back our special guest, and here he is. I feel very honored to be able to be here today to introduce to, not to America as far as his ministry. It's been received with incredible open heart, but for him to be in America and to literally have his feet on the ground and ministering, the first interview that he's ever done here in the United States. And, of course, he's going to be speaking at Lakewood Church. And I'm just so honored and so grateful for the message and the mandate that he has from the Lord. Would you welcome him again, Pastor Joseph? So, I'm a tweeter, so I love to tweet. You know, that for me, that's my television ministry. I don't have one right now, so I tweet and Facebook. But today I said this, and I don't know how you'll take this, but I said, because we had a few minutes together, and I said, this guy's the real deal. If you cut him open, he bleeds grace. And I actually have a word. I have to be very careful when I say it, but I made up a word called gracist. And you really have opened up. Be careful when you say that word, but I think I like it. It's a clever word, I think. But anyway, I just am so thankful that God, and I want to go back just a little bit because people that have read your book know the story. How did this happen? How did God take? Because I know that you were influenced by a lot of the same mentors that everyone else had, but yet something unique happened. Take us back to that moment, and then let's talk about this.
Well, I've been a word of faith preacher all the years before I encountered this grace revolution, and I remember in 1997, I was just driving up the Swiss Alps on vacation with Wendy, and she was sound asleep beside me, and I was just minding my own business, enjoying the Swiss Alps, the snow, and just driving quietly, and I heard the voice of the Lord. Now, I'm careful about saying the voice. Yeah. Something just an impression, but this was the voice of the Lord on the inside. And he said this to me: "You're not preaching grace." And I said, "Lord, I'm a grace man. I preach faith, I preach grace." He says, "No." He says, "Every time you preach grace, you try to balance it with the law. And therefore, you neutralize grace." And I said, "Well, Lord, that's a low blow. Whatever do you mean?" And he said that unless you preach radical grace, lives will not be radically transformed.
Wow.
So that marked the journey of grace, and I went back and I studied all I can about God's grace. And I remember, having a word of faith background, I've always, been intrigued by how to develop your faith, and I've listened to all the tapes, and I've been Hagenized and capsulized, and, read all the books. But one day, as I was sitting on the floor, I heard something I never heard anyone teach or preach. The Lord spoke to me again and says, "Would you like to know the secret of great faith?" I said, "Of course." Then he says, "You know that there are two in the scriptures that I said had great faith." When Jesus was on earth, there were two he mentioned had great faith. One was a centurion, and the other was that woman of Canaan, the Syrophoenician woman. And to the centurion he says, "I've not found so great faith, no, not in Israel."
Right.
And to the Canaanite woman whose daughter was demon-possessed, he says, "Oh woman, great is your faith."
Yeah.
So only two had great faith. So he told me this. He said this to me. What was their secret? And I said, well, I know the answer to that, because the centurion, he's a man of authority. He understood authority. He was a soldier, and I heard all the sermons before. Sure. So I just gave him the pet answers that I... And he says, what about that woman? She was a homemaker. Nothing could be more different. And he says that if you study the common denominator between these two, you'll find the secret of great faith.
Yeah.
And I studied as much as I can for the next half an hour on the centurion and the woman, trying to find a common denominator. One was a man, one was a woman.
Yeah.
And one was a soldier, the other was a homemaker. I mean, nothing could be, further apart. And after about half an hour, my lightning fast mind asked the Lord, I don't know the answer, tell me. And he says, both were Gentiles. Both were Gentiles. And I've never heard anyone say that. And I said, what do you mean, Lord? He said that they were not law conscious. They didn't even know the Ten Commandments. But they were Jesus conscious. They knew who was standing in front of them. Now, if you ask an average believer today, all right, what voids faith? They'll probably give you the answer. Sin. Amen. Sin. You know. But if you study the scriptures, it says, if those who are of the law, Romans 4, those who are of the law be heirs, faith is made void. And the promise made of no effect. So it is the law that voids faith and makes the promises of God of no effect. And I've never heard that preached. What I hear is that revival stopped because of sin. Now, if sin can stop because of revival, it would never have begun. Because, you know, revival happens where there is sin. And where sin increases, grace superabounds.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why revival stopped. It's because man comes in and puts in their laws and legislations.
Yeah.
And they revive the law. It kills faith. It shuts up faith. So that woman, as well as the centurion, all they were conscious of is how great Jesus is. They were not even conscious how great their faith was. They were not even conscious of their own faith. But they were conscious of great Jesus. And he turns around and says, oh woman, great is your faith.
Yeah.
He sees their faith.
Wow. So when you talk about grace, I love in your writings that you don't really separate it from Jesus to you.
Yes.
And really, I think, when the veil is removed,
Right.
grace is Jesus. Jesus
Yes.
is grace.
Yes.
And someone, you know, that people always talk about a different Jesus. Well, to me, when I read your book, there's two different Jesuses. There's the Jesus of grace, and then there's the other one.
Yes, another
And
Jesus.
That's the Jesus that we want to embrace.
Right.
And why do people battle with this? Why is it that it's so good? I've watched this with Joel and the Message of Hope. And I'm watching this message. When I read your book, it's just so liberating. It's just like getting into an ocean, and you're just like overwhelmed. Surely God's not this good. Are you kidding me? There's got to be a hook here. This is extreme. What's your reaction to people that maybe come in and with caution and say, be careful that you're not too extreme with grace? What are they saying, and what is your reaction to that?
I understand their fears, and many a times when I hear people say that, I'm encouraged because the same accusations were leveled against the Apostle Paul. And I remember reading Martin Lloyd-Jones, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, the English theologian. He's passed away now, Westminster Abbey's pastor. And he said this in his series on Romans. He says, how come today we don't have the same accusations leveled against us that was leveled against Paul? They accused Paul of saying, shall we sin more that grace may abound? They accused Paul of saying that now Paul must have preached radically where sin increased, grace superabounds.
Yeah.
He must have preached that strong enough for them to misunderstand him.
Right.
All right?
Wow.
Then he says this, I submit to you, he says, that we are not preaching the same message Paul is preaching. Because if we are preaching the same gospel, the same accusations will level against us.
Wow.
So today when I hear people accuse me of that, I rejoice. I'm in good company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. So the ideal that God's grace is so abundant, that God's grace is so much greater than any of our works or anything that we can do right or wrong.
Yep.
The first reaction to the mind is, this is too good to be true. And are you saying that we have a license to sin? And you're actually saying that's the entrance to getting how great grace is.
The Bible is very clear. I mean, I wonder sometimes if people can read, you know. It's in the Bible, in Romans 6:14, very clearly it says, for sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under law but under grace. Now it's when you are under grace, sin has no dominion over you. All right? So the opposite is true. When you're under law, guess what? Sin has dominion over you.
Yeah.
The more you try not to do something, the more you try, the worse it is.
Yeah.
You should not be trying, you should be resting and just trust the Lord.
Yeah.
He is your righteousness, He is your wisdom, He is your holiness, He is your redemption.
Yeah.
Amen. Just rest in Him. Now, the scriptures also tell us in Romans 5:17, if by one man's offense death reigned by one, much more those who receive abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness will reign in life by one Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Now, if you know that these two gifts of God, the abundance of grace, notice, if someone asks the question, can you preach too much on grace? It is by the abundance of grace that you reign.
Abundance.
We need an abundance of teaching on grace.
Wow.
To receive abundance of grace.
Wow.
And when you receive abundance of grace and the gift, notice it's a gift, not a reward.
Yeah.
The gift of right. When you receive these two, guess what? You reign in life. And when you reign in life, the devil doesn't.
Yeah.
When you reign in life, sickness doesn't.
Yeah.
When you reign in life, your evil addictions doesn't. You know, when you reign in life, you reign, man.
Yeah.
So now, if I were the devil, all right, if I were the devil, which I'm not, he's not this good looking. But if I were the devil, guess what I'll attack? I'll attack these two gifts. Abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness.
Wow.
And I'll assassinate the characters of anyone that preaches on these two.
Wow.
So Joel's ministry, he preaches grace, hope, you know, righteousness as a gift. And the devil's job, you can always tell how powerful a truth is by the number of controversies the devil gathers around it.
Yeah.
Okay, when God restored the truth of healing, the devil put a signpost that said heresy.
Yeah.
When God restored the truth of prosperity, the devil put a signpost that says heresy.
Yeah.
And the church back off from the truth.
Yeah.
We should not back away from the truth.
No, no.
And you can tell how powerful that truth is by the amount of controversies against the truth.
Wow. You know, the people, I think one of the biggest challenges that people have is that even Christians, and because this teaching hasn't been unveiled, and because the traditions of men have, and the fear that if we preach it, that it's going to give people a license. People are actually, and many Christians are actually still carrying condemnation.
Yes.
And, you know, so many Christians, when you talk to them, you have this sense that God is mad at them, that they feel ashamed. They don't pray because they're afraid to get in God's presence.
Right.
Why is that? People actually feel that the debt of their sin is still conditional. You know, and I like the way you address the Lord's Prayer. I mean, I love the Lord's Prayer, but the Lord's Prayer has to go through the cross to get it. But there's actually people that are actually feeling as if their debts are still being, you know, carried over them. Talk to us about this problem that people have of debt that they feel awkward around.
It's a real problem. It's sin consciousness.
Yeah.
The sin debt on their conscience. And as long as you have a sin debt on your conscience, you always fear God in a spirit of bondage, a slavish fear. You know, when the scripture says in Romans 8, for you have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear.
Yeah.
That's fearing God in the Old Testament way.
Wow.
Because the word again is there. You have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear.
Yeah.
But you have received the spirit of sonship, by which we cry, Abba, Father.
Yeah.
When I was in Israel, I would hear little children running. You see, you learn a lot when you go to Israel. You know, and there was this playground, and kids were running around shouting, Abba, Abba, Abba. That was Daddy, Daddy, Daddy.
Yeah.
Now, although I teach on the names of God, Jehovah, El Shaddai, Elohim, wonderful as those names are, He wants to be known as Abba, Daddy.
Yeah.
And that's a spirit of sonship. And if you cannot say that, you have the slavish fear of fearing God.
Yeah.
Now, what about the fear of the Lord? People ask the question. Would you like Jesus' definition of the fear of the Lord?
Yes.
When he was tempted in the wilderness, all right, the devil came to him and says, fall before me and worship me and I'll give you everything. Jesus said, it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God and him only shalt thou serve. Now, if you look at the quotation, he was quoting from Deuteronomy. You'll find in Deuteronomy it says, thou shalt fear the Lord.
Yeah.
So Jesus defined the fear of the Lord as the worship of God.
Oh, wow. So it's a reverence, it's a worship.
Yeah, it's a worship of God. It is not this fearing God like you fear a snake or something like that. You know?
Yeah, talk to me about this illustration. I don't know if it came from your book, Destined to Reign or Unmerited Favor, but talk to me about this analogy of someone who owes someone.
Okay. Suppose I owe you some money, all right? And I owe, let's say, $10,000.
You owe to me.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Okay. All right? Now, whenever I see you, okay, I promise to pay you back in a month's time.
Okay.
All right? So
it's been a month.
Okay, it's been a month. And it's been a month. I tried my best to pay you, but I couldn't pay you. All right? So every time I see you, guess what? I'll avoid you. All right? Because I have debt on my conscience. All right, I tried my best to pay, but I couldn't pay. So whenever I try to see you, I try to avoid being in the same room with you.
Yeah.
I try to avoid you. Now, supposing Joel hears about my debt.
Yeah.
All right? And let's just assume Joel has some money.
Okay.
All right? And Joel is in a hurry to, have a night of hope in Paris, for example. So he's in a hurry. He hears about my predicament, and he says, you know what Joseph owed you? Or how much does he owe you? He says, 10,000.
10,000.
And he gives you $1 million check.
Come on.
All right?
Is this prophetic or is this an analogy? Just an analogy. Okay, go ahead.
Keep on hoping, brother. There's a message of hope there. But, that's an overpayment.
Wow.
And because he loves me so much, he just wants me to have no debt on my conscience and to feel free around you. He just blesses you. Now, what has happened here? You've been enriched.
Yeah.
It's an overpayment.
Yeah.
Now, what Joel did was that he appointed someone, one of his assistants, to inform me that my debt has been paid.
Yeah.
Now, how well that has been communicated to me, all right, is important. Yes. If that person comes and say, it's something about Joel paying something, your debt, I'm not too sure about the details, but just to be safe on the safe side, keep on paying Phil. Now, it's a mixed message.
Yeah.
Right?
You bet.
Now, what has happened is that the body of Christ, we have not heard the pure gospel. All right? We have not even, let alone not only the payment, but the overpayment.
The overpayment.
All right? Because Jesus' payment to God is much more.
Wow.
All right? He's like a $1 million debt for our $10,000 debt. Wow. A payment for a ton. So he's an overpayment. That's why the Bible says much more, much more, much more.
Much more, much more.
Okay? So now, when I see you, let's say someone comes over and communicates clearly. Joseph! In the middle of the night, he calls me up. Joseph!
Yeah.
He wakes me up. And he says, good news. All right, you know what Joel did? He loved you so much. He gave $1 million payment to Phil. Guess what? Next morning, I'm at your front door.
Yeah, you are.
I'm at your front door and I say, hey, Phil, come on. You've been enriched because of me.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
I'm no longer avoiding you. I'm no longer, come on, man.
Wow.
How about a treat? Come on.
Wow.
And some 5-star Italian restaurant. Come on, bro. Hey, come on. And how about sharing a bit of that? Now, the thing is this. When we realize how much Jesus has paid our sin debt. He paid a debt he did not owe. Right? I owed a debt I could never pay. But his payment was an overpayment. Because if you know the quality, the value of that one man, compared to all the men that have ever lived, he's an overpayment.
Jesus.
And if I can say this reverently, God has become a gainer. Enriched by redemption. He has gained much more from redemption than he ever lost through Adam's sin.
Wow.
And that's something all believers must know.
Wow.
When you come to God, all right, he's been enriched.
Wow.
He reaps a greater harvest of praise and worship to him than he ever did from creation.
My goodness.
From the fields of redemption. Hallelujah.
Oh,
this is amazing grace.
Wow.
Amen.
So, the first thing that comes to my mind is, come boldly now.
Yeah.
Come boldly. Not when you're doing good, because it doesn't matter. Because even when you're in trouble, even when you've had a bad day, come boldly.
Come boldly to obtain mercy.
Because you already know. I mean, the payment has been overpaid.
Right.
There's not enough that you can do. And wow, that's a little staggering, man.
And our sins are forgiven, past, present, and future. Now, some people are afraid when you preach that, all right? And they'll say things like, I cannot preach that in my church. There's no telling what people would do.
Yeah.
All right? So they rather not preach the truth because of some fleshly fear than to trust the power of the gospel to change people. Now, obviously, Jesus does not share the same sentiments as these people, because Jesus believed whoever is forgiven much, they will love much. And like the woman, probably a prostitute who came to Simon the Pharisee's house when Jesus was having dinner with him, and he wept at his feet, and she wiped his feet with her hair. And Jesus says, Simon, I have something to tell you. There were two debtors that owed a creditor. One owed 1,000, the other owed 100,000. When they both could not pay, he forgave them both. Who would love him more? And Simon the Pharisee having shekels, dollars in his eyes, he understands this language. He says, I assume the one who is forgiven most. I came to your house, you gave me no water for my feet. All right, look at this woman. She has not ceased weeping on my feet. You know why? Because the one that's forgiven little loves little.
Yeah.
The one that's forgiven much loves much.
Yeah.
So we need to preach the truth. The reason why the body of Christ is not passionately in love with God, with Jesus, they give lips, I love you, Lord, but in their hearts, it's because of this, they still have this sin debt on their conscience.
Absolutely.
And if only we'll preach the truth that your sins are forgiven, past, present, and future.
Yeah.
Rest easy, all right? That will not cause a licentious lifestyle.
Right.
Right believing will produce right living. We've had preaching from the pulpit, all right? Right living, character. And yet there's so much, there's a lack of character in the pews, and there's a lot of wrong living. Why is that so?
Yeah.
Because the pulpit is not a place of unveiling the law. It's a place of unveiling Jesus and His finished work. Yeah. Right believing. If they believe right, they will live right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is the believing that's most important.
Well, this is so crucial, because what I see is that a lot of Christians, they really have been forgiven a lot, but they don't know it. Someone has not made them aware that not only, and this is what I see. I work with Joel. I'm a pastor, but because I see what God is doing. And the Christian community is stuck judging.
Right.
And I always tell people, resist the nudge, the judge. But they can't help themselves, because we judge that which we're having a problem with. Jesus made it clear. It's a dead giveaway. Whatever you're judging, it's what you yourself need to be judged in. And I think tonight, and you coming here, and I mean this, I'm saying this with all the sincerity and whatever equity I have, I'm leaning into this. Your message, this message, it's not your message, you're a facilitator.
It's a rediscovery of the gospel.
But someone, the Bible says, how can they hear unless a man will preach it? And how can a man preach it unless he's sent?
Right.
I want to prophetically say to you that for such a time as now, the nations are opening. You must speak this word, because we are devouring one another. We are judging one another. We can't even celebrate. I've watched Joel. I've watched nearly 1 million people give their life to Christ, but people can't even celebrate that, because we're such in bondage. And I just, in the minutes that we have left here, I just want to release a prophetic prayer that God is going to begin to unveil. Amen. And I want to talk about your fruit for a minute, because when this happened, your church, just give us a little bit of the fruit that is being experienced at New Creation Church in Singapore.
I shared my experience in 1997. Prior to that, the church has been growing steadily, but we hit a ceiling, a plateau at 2000. I've been preaching the word of faith in Singapore. And Singapore is a beautiful country, by the way. Excellent. Great place to shop. And it's a tiny island, but we were growing until 1997. We hit the plateau for a long time. We couldn't seem to break through the plateau. And that was the time the Lord spoke to me about grace. And when I went back to my church and preached radically about grace, that was the time that the plateau just broke and the ceiling just broke. And, it's been amazing ever since. And
Like you, how many people do you touch on a weekly basis?
About 22,000 people come to church.
In a moment, I want you to pray. I want you to just release. I believe that nothing can happen until prophetically it's released. I just want you to just release a blessing, a prayer. Just because I believe, because the mantle of God is upon you, that in the 2 minutes that we have, just release this upon our churches. Release this upon this nation. We are stuck, and we need this message of grace. And I believe we're on sacred, holy ground right now. I take seriously that God has sent you to this country. And I respect the sovereignty of God to bring you for such a time as this. And I just want you to look to the world, and especially this country, and release a prayer blessing of grace.
Phil, I feel in my heart a special love for pastors.
Yeah.
You know, pastors want to preach the truth, and I just want to speak to the pastors for a while. You know, Galatians chapter 1 tells us, if we preach any other gospel, if we are an angel from heaven, not an angel from hell, an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel than the gospel of grace, than what we have preached to you, let him be anathema, accursed. And if that is not enough, he repeats twice. If we are an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel, let him be accursed.
Wow.
Now, I want to challenge you, pastors. When you preach the gospel of grace, the opposite will happen. You'll be doubly blessed.
Yeah.
Because the Bible is so clear that it's the gospel of grace that unveils Jesus. Grace is not a teaching. Grace is the person of Jesus Christ. If you are watching this right now, wherever you may be, going to encounter the person of Jesus. When you touch him, you touch your healing. When you touch him, you touch your prosperity, your provision.
Yes.
When you touch him, you touch your emotional wholeness, and your broken heart will be healed. I want to pray for you right now. Stretch your hands towards Titi. Father in heaven, you said, Lord, when you bless the people in these words, I'll put my name on them, and I will bless them.
Yes.
The Lord himself blessed you
Yes.
with the blessings of Deuteronomy 28 and the blessings of Abraham.
Yes.
The Lord make his face shine on you, protect you from all evil, protect you from this economic downturn. You are in the world, but you are not of the world.
Jesus.
Your provisions are from his riches in glory.
Yes.
And I release upon you the abundance of heaven.
Yes.
I release upon you
My
the
Jesus.
riches of Jesus.
My Jesus.
I release upon you abundance of grace.
Wow.
And the gift of righteousness. Now reign in life.
Yes.
Reign over your addictions. Reign over your
Yes.
sin. Reign in life.
Amen.
For Jesus has qualified you.
Amen.
Amen.
Get on the phone. Let us know that grace is alive and well in
Amen.
you. That you received it tonight. We love you. God bless you.
God bless.